Some connections don't announce themselves. They don't arrive loudly or demand attention. They begin quietly, in ordinary places, on ordinary days, a shared silence, a familiar face, a feeling you can't explain yet. This isn't a story about love at first sight. It's about noticing, about patience, and about the quiet moments that slowly change everything. Evan had always considered himself an observer, rather than a participant in the small rhythms of everyday life, preferring the quiet corners of his favorite cafe in Portland to the chaos of social gatherings. Yet something about that rainy Monday morning unsettled him. Claire appeared like a subtle rhythm he hadn't noticed before, slipping in with her umbrella, brushing water from her coat, and ordering her usual tea with a calmness that seemed almost deliberate, her presence like a soft melody threading through the noise of the cafe. She chose the same seat by the window every time, a place where the gray light fell evenly across her hair, and she seemed content to watch the world outside, as if waiting for something or someone without knowing it herself. Evan couldn't help but notice small details. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the careful way she held her cup, the slight crease between her brows when she read, absorbed in a world she kept separate from the bustling room. He told himself it was nothing at first, that it was just coincidence, the sort of pattern the mind notices when it's bored or lonely. Yet, as days passed, her repeated visits began to feel intentional, and he realized he was noticing more than he had expected. The barista mentioned her name casually, Claire. But Evan didn't use it aloud. He only held it in his mind, a small secret to consider while observing the way she laughed quietly at something in her book or smiled at the stranger passing by the window. He tried to rationalize his growing attention, telling himself people pass through places all the time, that habits fade, that faces disappear without leaving a mark. Yet the truth nodded at him. There was something in her persistence, a subtle steadiness that made the usual anonymity of his days feel incomplete. He whispered to himself that he thought people like her would tire fast, that interest and curiosity often burn out quickly in the mundane rhythm of daily life. But Claire defied that assumption, returning day after day, unchanged, steady, and somehow present in a way that felt intentional and meaningful. And the realization stirred something in him he hadn't felt in years, a mixture of curiosity, caution, and an almost imperceptible hope that maybe this time someone wouldn't disappear as quickly as life had taught him to expect. Every day he arrived at the cafe, there she was. And every day he found himself choosing a seat where he could see her without being noticed, feeling the strange tension of wanting to speak, to make a connection, yet fearing it would ruin the quiet perfection of her presence. And so, the rainy Monday became more than just a day. It became the start of a slow, unspoken connection, one built on repeated gestures, subtle observations, and the quiet hope that maybe persistence in the end was the most powerful form of communication of all. Evan thought he understood patterns, thought he understood people, but Claire, with her steady visits and silent watchfulness, challenged every assumption he had about fleeting attention and short-lived intrigue, and he found himself waiting, just as she seemed to wait for something that neither could name, yet both felt approaching. It was a small, ordinary scene, a cafe, rain outside, a book, a cup of tea. But for Evan, it was quietly extraordinary, the beginning of a story that neither would rush nor fully understand, and the first time in a long while he felt that life might stretch towards something meaningful, even if he didn't yet know what that something was. Weeks turned into months, and Evan realized that what had started as a quiet curiosity had grown into a steady, unspoken connection with Claire, one that neither rushed nor forced itself into the chaos of everyday life. Yet, it filled every small moment with unexpected warmth. They spoke in fragments at first, short greetings, shared smiles, and occasional small talk. But over time, those fragments became conversations that stretched into hours, bridging gaps that neither of them fully understood. Claire listened in a way that made Evan feel truly seen, as though he could speak without editing himself, without fearing judgment, while Evan's presence seemed to offer Claire a rare comfort, a space where she could lower the careful walls she had built around her heart after past disappointments. Theirs was not a conventional romance. It was quiet, patient, and deliberate, each interaction carrying a weight that neither had expected but both cherished. Distance, both literal and emotional, became part of their rhythm. Claire lived in Vancouver, Evan in Portland, and yet, despite the miles, their connection never wavered. Messages were sent, calls were made, and letters occasionally arrived, each one a small reminder that someone was thinking of them in a way that mattered. Both carried scars. Evan had loved deeply before and been abandoned unexpectedly, leaving him cautious and slow to trust, While Claire had chosen love before and found it unreciprocated, teaching her patience and resilience, they circled each other carefully, aware of the fragility of their emotions, yet drawn to the certainty of the bond that had formed without effort or expectation. Nights were often restless for Evan, lying awake and wondering why Claire never pushed him, why she waited without complaint, why she stayed patient when most people would have walked away, and he realized that her steadiness was a quiet kind of courage, a determination to keep going even when life tested them. Claire, on her side, felt the same tension in her chest whenever Evan went silent. Every message from him carrying weight, every pause filled with meaning. Neither rushed declarations, neither demanded explanations. They simply allowed their connection to grow in its own measured way, trusting in the rhythm that had brought them together. Shared jokes, casual comments, and the smallest gestures became milestones of intimacy, evidence that what they had was fragile yet enduring. Evan often found himself thinking about the gray mornings in the cafe where they had first noticed each other, and how those moments had quietly set the stage for everything else, proving that consistency and patience could outlast fleeting passion. Despite the long distance, despite the uncertainty of their past experiences, they both kept returning to the thread that connected them, understanding that love could be gentle and persistent, not always loud or immediate. Each day they communicated, they discovered more about each other's hopes, fears, and hidden dreams, slowly dismantling the walls built by life's earlier disappointments. And as months passed, Evan began to understand that the bond he had underestimated was stronger than he imagined, that Claire's presence was not temporary or fleeting, and that the quiet consistency she showed in their interactions was a rare gift. They did not make promises they were not ready to keep, nor did they set expectations that might falter under pressure. Instead, they moved forward slowly, savoring each connection, each message, each shared laugh, understanding that the heart's endurance mattered more than immediate gratification. Love, they realized, could exist in small gestures, in patience, and in the willingness to show up again and again, even when life was unpredictable. Evan thought of all the times he had believed people would tire fast, but Claire had quietly disproved that notion, showing him that real connection could persist across distance and time, that the human heart could remain steady even in uncertainty. And so, day after day, week after week, month after month, they built something neither had expected. A bond that was quietly growing, emotionally rich and resilient. A reminder that true connection does not need to rush to prove itself, but thrives in the steady persistence of care, attention, and mutual respect. A love that kept going, even when everything around them seemed temporary or uncertain. When Evan finally decided to visit Vancouver, he felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness, unsure of what awaited him beyond the screen and the words they had shared for months. Yet, the moment he stepped off the train and felt the crisp winter air, he sensed that something significant was about to shift between them. Claire was waiting at the station, her coat wrapped tightly around her, hair catching the soft light of late afternoon. And when their eyes met, the months of distance seemed to collapse into a single heartbeat, a tension that neither words nor gestures could fully explain. They walked together along the waterfront, the city moving around them in a blur. Yet the world seemed to shrink to the narrow path they shared, filled with unspoken questions and tentative hope. Their conversation flowed naturally at first. Light topics, shared memories, small laughter, but soon the pauses grew longer, heavier, carrying the weight of feelings neither wanted to name aloud. Finally, Claire stopped walking, her gaze fixed on the water as if it held the answers, and turned to Evan with a seriousness that made his chest tighten. "There's something you need to know," she said, her voice calm, but trembling just slightly. A mixture of determination and vulnerability that made Evan hold his breath. What she revealed was unexpected. She had been offered a job transfer to New York, an opportunity she could not refuse, a life-changing chance that required her to leave Vancouver and the fragile routine they had built together. Evan felt the ground shift beneath him. The words, though carefully chosen, carried the weight of potential separation, of dreams paused and hearts tested. He struggled to reconcile the happiness of finally being near her with the fear that their connection might not survive this change. Yet when he looked into her eyes, he saw the same steady courage he had admired from afar, the same persistence that had kept their bond alive despite distance. "I understand," he said quietly, even as an ache settled deep in his chest, a recognition that love sometimes requires patience and sacrifice beyond immediate desire. Claire's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and she admitted softly, "I thought you'd stop trying. Most people do." In that moment, Evan realized the truth of their connection. It had never been about effort or expectation, but about consistency, about choosing each other in small ways again and again. They spent the rest of the afternoon walking without speaking much, letting the rhythm of their steps speak for the emotions that words could not fully capture, both understanding that life had introduced a test, one that could determine whether their bond would endure or fade under the pressure of new circumstances. Even as the city lights began to reflect on the water, painting the evening with soft golds and blues, Evan and Claire felt the tension between longing and reality, the delicate balance of wanting to hold on while respecting the paths life demanded they follow. Every gesture, the brushing of a hand, a shared glance, the subtle tilt of a head carried meaning, expressing the depth of their feelings without a single declaration. And in those quiet moments, Evan realized that love in its truest form often manifests not in grand gestures, but in the steady courage to remain present, to continue caring even when the future is uncertain. He reflected on the months of waiting, messaging, and small acts of connection, understanding that Claire's persistence and patience had built a foundation stronger than any fleeting passion, and that the decision to stay connected, to keep showing up for each other emotionally, was a testament to the power of real intimacy. The possibility of separation was painful, yet it highlighted the strength of what they had created together, a reminder that enduring love is often forged through challenges and choices that test the heart's resilience. As evening deepened, Evan and Claire sat on a bench by the water, watching boats drift in the distance, and in the quiet space between them, they shared an understanding without words that what they had was rare, that it deserved patience, and that neither would abandon the bond that had been nurtured with care and attention over months of distance and small discoveries. Even facing the prospect of a physical separation, they found solace in the knowledge that emotional closeness need not vanish simply because geography demanded it, that letters, messages, and intentional acts of connection could bridge the miles if both were willing to keep going. And so in that moment of revelation, tension, and vulnerability, Evan recognized that the story of them was not about instant gratification or certainty, but about endurance, about showing up, about the quiet courage to continue even when life presents unexpected challenges. He understood that love's truest measure was persistence, the ability to remain present in the face of uncertainty, and that Claire's honesty, even when it introduced fear and doubt, was itself an act of love, a trust placed in him that their connection could survive the unknown. By the time they parted that evening, walking slowly back toward the city streets, their steps were synchronized, their hearts heavy yet hopeful, each carrying the knowledge that the real test of their bond had just begun, but that they had already proven through months of distance, patience, and shared understanding that they could endure. Evan realized that the moment, though challenging and filled with potential heartbreak, was also a turning point, a revelation that love, when nurtured with care, courage, and persistence, could survive trials and distance, and that neither of them had ever truly considered giving up, despite the fear that the future might demand it. In the quiet of that Vancouver evening, with the city lights reflecting in the water and the cold air sharp on their faces, they both understood that their story was not defined by immediacy or certainty, but by the deliberate choice to keep going, to trust in the bond they had patiently built, and to honor the quiet, enduring love that had brought them together despite months of separation and the looming challenge of change. Months passed after that winter in Vancouver, and Evan returned to Portland, carrying a quiet ache. The memory of Claire's words and the weight of her upcoming move lingering with every step he took through the familiar streets and into the cafe where their story had begun. Yet, he discovered that absence had not weakened their connection. It had only made it more tangible, more deliberate, as each message, call, and letter became a lifeline, a reminder that love could persist across distance when nurtured with patience and intention. He wrote to her regularly, sharing the small details of his days, the ordinary moments that now felt extraordinary because they were shared with someone who understood him completely. And Claire responded with equal care, painting her life in New York with words that carried longing, humor, and quiet reflection, each note bridging the miles with warmth and honesty. They did not promise forever, nor did they attempt to force timelines. Instead, they allowed their connection to unfold at its own pace, trusting the foundation they had built over months of subtle gestures and steady presence. Evan imagined her walking through the streets of New York, the bustling energy contrasting with the calm they had cultivated, and he felt both pride and longing, realizing that their bond had grown resilient enough to withstand separation, yet delicate enough to demand care and attention. The letters became ritual, each one a small revelation, a reassurance that despite challenges, they remained present in each other's lives, choosing to continue rather than surrender to uncertainty. Winter faded into spring, and Evans hoped quietly, nourished by every word from Claire and every small act that reaffirmed their connection. And he found himself waiting not out of fear, but out of conviction, trusting that their love had the endurance to survive trials and distance. Then one evening, a letter arrived that was different, short, deliberate, yet carrying a weight that made Evan's pulse quicken. "I'm coming home. If you're still there." It was simple, yet it held everything unspoken, the longing, the courage, and the readiness to bridge the gap that months of distance had created. Evan didn't hesitate. He prepared for her arrival with a mixture of nervous excitement and calm certainty, understanding that their reunion was not merely a moment of joy, but a culmination of patience, persistence, and unwavering care that had defined their relationship from the beginning. When Claire finally walked into the cafe, snow-dusting her coat and hair, Evan stood before she could speak, their eyes meeting with recognition, relief, and unspoken gratitude, a connection that needed no explanation because it had been sustained through months of thoughtful, deliberate effort. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic declarations, only the quiet, steady presence of two people who had chosen to keep going, who had trusted that love's endurance mattered more than immediate gratification or certainty. The world outside continued in its usual rhythm, but inside the cafe, time seemed suspended, the space between them filled with the weight of all they had endured, all they had written, and all they had waited for patiently. Every hesitation, every pause, every carefully measured word over the past months crystallized in that moment, showing that real connection was not about speed or convenience, but about consistency, courage, and the willingness to persist even when life threatened to pull them apart. Evan and Claire's story was proof that love could thrive quietly across distance, and in uncertainty that patience was as vital as passion, and that persistence could transform longing into fulfillment without haste or demand. As they sat together sharing warmth and presence, they understood that their journey had not been defined by dramatic gestures or immediate satisfaction, but by the daily choice to show up, to communicate, and to remain emotionally present, creating a bond resilient enough to withstand months of separation and changes in circumstance. The realization settled gently between them. They had built something rare, a love that did not tire, that persisted quietly through time, distance, and the small trials of life, proving that steady, deliberate care could overcome the odds when both hearts were willing. And in that moment, with the quiet hum of the cafe around them, Evan thought back to the very first days of noticing her, to the rainy mornings and subtle gestures, and he smiled, knowing that he had been wrong to assume people like Claire would tire fast, because they hadn't, and neither had he, and that persistence, trust, and quiet devotion had finally brought them together, not in haste, but in the slow, beautiful rhythm of a love that endured.